What is up, everybody? It's the Inhuman one here, and today I wanted to show you guys a true beginner's guide on mapping. Mapping is of course only obtainable once you have completed first Acts 1 through 3 and then Acts 3 once again on the cruel difficulty. And once you do that, you'll gain access to the mapping system. So mapping in and of itself can be, I'd say, very overwhelming, but it's actually quite simple. And first and foremost, what you want to do is you want to kind of get an idea of what all of the elements are. So the map in general can look something like this, and this is still very early on in the game, or the end game I should say, but it becomes, I would say, much more manageable if you break it down to smaller parts. So first and foremost, you have several objectives and things you're trying to complete, and essentially you're trying to complete all of the different nodes, right? So these little nodes all in around, this is your starting spot, the Ziggurat Refuge. These nodes here, green nodes, mean that you've completed a map. Blue nodes mean they're places where you could go. And then essentially you can kind of just, as you complete a node or a map, you just continue along the way until you find your destination. Understanding kind of what the destination is and even how to activate the maps can be a little overwhelming and confusing at first. So essentially, if you wanted to select any area from this starting point and say that I did want to go to the blooming field, for example, all I need to do is select, and then you'd have this new currency, and they're called waystones. Waystones range anywhere from tier 1 to tier 15, and they can, of course, increase the monster difficulty and have their own set of modifiers. So in this instance, if I was to use tier 1, which is what you're going to start off with, you're going to see that it has a 100% chance of dropping another waystone, which is good for sustainability, and also it has 86% increased gold, which that's fine. Monsters have 186 increased chance of doing a critical hit, which is not so fine, and then a 33% chance to monster critical damage. So all in all, that's kind of working against us. Aside from the fact that we have a 100% drop chance and a little bit more gold, we will be taking a lot more damage, so we need to be careful. So if I did want to go there, I would just simply place it in the device and then traverse. But what happens is you're going to say, well, where would I need to go? How do I determine what the best path to take is? Well, first and foremost, I think it's really good that you use your map legend. In the legend, it's going to point out a few things and points of interest, some of which you may not understand, but we're going to be going over in great detail. So first and foremost, I would say the most important thing to do is get a hideout. So hideouts are going to be, if you look in the left-hand corner here, right above me, the very bottom, you're going to see Wandering Trader, and then right above that, a hideout. Kind of looks like the St. Louis symbol or whatever, the little fleur-de-lis looking thing. So anyway, so from there, what you would do is, this was my hideout location, one of the first. So I had to clear this area, continue clearing all of these maps by placing in the waystones, and then I finally got to my failed hideout, which was one of the first hideouts I had unlocked. When you have a hideout, you can actually, it's very similar to this. You have a place where you can trade, interact with different NPCs, and of course access your stash and any of your other, benches and things like that. So that's very important for that reason. However, everybody's map is going to be different. So it's important to note that, and also to note that your hideout might be much closer or further away than mine. So one of the first things to do is, of course, input the waystones and find the clearest path, and try to use nodes that don't have these things called influences. So if you see here, this particular place called Seepage's map has 3 influences, and if you don't know what they are, you can just look at the key, and one is, of course, the map boss. So based on location, geographic location, you're going to have a certain type of boss. Then we have Breach, which is an endgame mechanic we're going to be exploring. And then you have Corruption, which is kind of like another, it's a slight modifier, if you will. So not quite an endgame game type or mode. It is just simply a modifier you will see on the maps that have the Corruption. So essentially what you want to do is, when you're finding your hideout, you want to avoid these places, because these are great areas for farming, loot, and experience, and all kinds of great gear. So what you want to do is you want to avoid them. You want to kind of go the path of least resistance and go on a path that's going to avoid most of those kind of juicy areas, if you will, because those again are going to be best attempted when you're at a higher level, because the higher the tier stone, the higher the better your rewards and loot is going to be. So your gear can potentially have a higher chance of being unique, more rares, etc. Right? So essentially what you do is you kind of find your way to your hideouts, wherever those may be. And once you find your hideouts, Then what you want to do is you want to find a way and a clear path to all these towers. You might notice that there's tons of towers off in the distance, and there's different types, and we're going to go over each of those as well before we go into the in-game mechanics themselves. But first and foremost, what you want to do is find your hideout. Then you want to find pathways to towers. So whatever towers are nearest by, you can definitely clear a path and do anything possible to get to those towers. If you can find a path of least resistance, even better. That way you don't waste any of those nodes or maps that have the resistances, or I'm sorry, the influences on them. When you go to a tower, you're going to see a few things. In this particular instance, you see this is called Lost Tower. All the towers are considered lost towers. Similar to any other map node, what you want to do is you want to click on it, and then you do need to use a waystone in order to activate it and traverse the area. The major goal of each of these types of different maps is actually quite simple. So for the standard maps, which are these right here, I can't even get out for some reason. Lovely. It won't let me get out. That's great. So for the regular nodes like this one, for example, all you need to do is clear out every single rare monster that appears inside the map. So on Riverside, there could be anywhere from, I'd say anywhere from really 1 to maybe 8 monsters, depending on the waystone and the modifiers you have. And all the rare monsters need to be cleared out. You do not need to, clear the entire 100% of the map. You don't need to kill 100% of the enemies, although there will be a counter. You simply need to defeat all of the rare enemies inside that map. In the Lost Towers, for example, it's a slightly different objective. Your objective is to simply activate the beacon that's referred to as a precursor beacon. So after you use a waystone to traverse the Lost Tower and clear it, the precursor beacon will be activated. Later on, what you can do is you'll obtain precursor tablets. When you place a precursor tablet inside of a Lost Tower, it would look something like this. And I'll show you right now. Let's take a look at one of the towers I've cleared. So this, for example, it says map completed. If you go inside now, instead of having a number of waystone cells, it just has tiles specifically for influence. And the only thing that can influence the towers is, of course, a precursor tablet. So a precursor tablet is going to do a number of different things, and it's going to impact and influence surrounding nodes. This is where it gets really important, and this is where the strategy comes into play. So essentially what you want to do is, there are precursor tablets that range in rarity and quality just like any other item, including the waystones that we've obtained. If for whatever reason you have a precursor tablet, there are going to be different types, some that are basic, and then some that have ties to endgame mechanics, which we're going to jump into in just a few moments. In this particular instance, this is a kind of a standard precursor tablet, and it's not a very good one because it only irradiates 5 maps within range. So that means that some random 5 maps within range are going to be affected by that influence. Irradiation just means that the monster level will be +1. So that's okay, but what you really want to look for are precursor tablets that affect 8 or more nodes or maps in range. There are also different types, like I mentioned. So say, for example, you have a certain, let's just go over the game mechanic, and it would be breach, for example. Breach is one of the game mechanics, or end game mechanics here, just like you see with the little hand. That means that in this particular game mode, there is a certain end game mechanic that can allow us to get special loot to work towards a pinnacle boss, or just better chances of getting loot, and it's a mechanic that we might enjoy. Let's say that we do really enjoy breach because it's fun and we have a good time, high success rate with it. Well, you know what we could do? We could find a precursor tablet that has breach influence, and then we would apply the breach precursor tablet, so that way it would impact hopefully 8 or more maps, but in this instance it would influence 5, right? And then now each of the 5 maps that have been influenced will have breach associated with them now. So it's important to know kind of how those work. These items, both waystones and precursor tablets, are really interesting because they do range from 1 to 15 in terms of the waystones, but they're treated like any other item. They can be plain, like this right here, the white waystone, which is just a normal one without any modifiers whatsoever. And then you can have different qualities. Like, for example, I have these rare qualities of waystone tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, etc. This is of course going to have a number of greater modifiers that, for instance, increase the quantity of items found in the area and the quality and rarity of the items. But of course, you're also going to have some detrimental effects that increase the monster's damage, maybe the number of rare monsters, etc. And some of those things can work in our favor. But what you want to do is you always want to make sure, if you are using a waystone, you're using a waystone that's not going to be a complete killer for your build. Like, say for example, you have a certain elemental damage in particular, and the enemies are now immune to that damage. You would not want to pick that one, for example. The other main objective of mapping is, if you look at your quests, it's going to show that you have to complete a number of tier X maps, right? So you have to complete 10 of each tier, all the way from 1 to 15. And every time you complete, say for example, you complete 10 tier 1 maps, you're going to get what they call a book of knowledge. And the book of knowledge allows you to use points in a new passive tree called the Atlas. So here we have the Atlas. I'm going to actually hold on to a square so you guys can see. I'm playing on PlayStation 5. So here we have another passive tree. This passive tree doesn't necessarily grant you different skills or abilities or any kind of buffs or anything like that. Instead, it can be focused on, this main tree here is going to be either increasing enemy difficulty and level, which will help you get better bonuses, or sustainability, which in this instance can give you things like increased quantity of waystones found in maps. Other items can increase the quality of not only the items, but also the waystones found in your map. So depending on the path you want to take, you can either go for sustainability or just go straight for, the higher difficulty bosses so you can get the best loot possible. Sustainability is quite important in the end game, so you certainly want to have a means to continue collecting more and more waystones. So drop chance is going to be important. Now we're going to go into each of the different end game mechanics. So this is our trees associated with each of those mechanics. So here we have breach, and we'll talk about breach in a little bit. But once you defeat the pinnacle boss associated with the breach end game mechanic, then you can apply points to these trees. Same goes for this, which is expedition. Expedition is another end game mechanic, and we also have a chance to face off with kind of a pinnacle boss, if you will. You have the ultimate end game boss we're going to be talking about, which is the arbiter. And of course, after you defeat him, you have points that you can associate and apply to your tree. And then we have delirium, which also has a pinnacle boss associated with it. And then ritual, which is another end game mechanic. So I'm going to go into each of these mechanics. This, of course, does also have a boss associated with it, and by defeating the boss, you can apply a passive point. So we're going to go to one of the nodes that has some of these features. So here, for example, we have this one, and this crypt is a node I haven't even touched yet, but it has a ritual influence. So what happens here is, in ritual, this is one of the 4 game modes. Ritual is going to be just like it was in Act 2, where you're facing off, well, actually it's Act 1, before you get to Freythorn. And you essentially have to defeat enemies within a kind of a really confined circle. And there's going to be effects, possibly pools of blood hitting you with dealing physical damage. And then you have to defeat all the enemies without dying. Now, if of course you die in any one of the nodes that have influences, it'll be considered a failed map node. And the essence and influence associated with it will be removed. So if I was trying this one, for example, and I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and complete the crypt, I would apply a waystone, and then I would try and beat the level. Remember, beating the level or clearing the map is simply defeating all of the rare enemies within that map. If the map happens to have an additional influence on it, like this one, then you have a special endgame mechanic that allows you to get more loot. So if I then tried the ritual and I died, then this map would no longer have that influence and be considered failed. So I'd have to try again, but unfortunately I wouldn't have a second chance at the ritual endgame mechanic. One thing to note is that in the ritual mechanic, you can obtain fragments to a key that would help you fight the pinnacle boss eventually at some point, and then of course apply those points in the passive tree associated with the Atlas. For breach is kind of interesting. It also has a pinnacle boss associated with it. And in breach, you simply interact with a hand, and I can actually show you each of these examples. So if you guys want a video showcasing each of the examples of the types of game mechanics and what they look like, and maybe some tips and tricks for beginners, I'd be more than happy to show you those as well. But Breach simply has an area that you interact with this creepy little hand, a big bubble comes out and all these special enemies come out. If you defeat them, and the faster you defeat them, the bigger the bubble's going to get and the slower it's going to contract. So you want to defeat as many enemies as possible so you can get breach fragments. Breach fragments allow you to, of course, cash in currency. You need 300 to fight the Pinnacle boss. The one in the middle that you see there looks kind of like a spiral. That's called Expedition. Expedition is a kind of endgame mechanic where you can, if that particular map has the Expedition on it, after you clear the map, I always strongly advise clearing the map first and then attempting the endgame mechanic. Then what you can do is you apply like explosives, and you can detonate them on specially marked locations, and you do have to kind of string them together so that they're tied and connected together, much like these nodes here. You can't just kind of willy-nilly put explosives everywhere. They do need to be connected, and once you detonate them, you can get chances at different kinds of artifacts. The artifacts, of course, can then be used as currency. So if you look here, you're going to get things like broken circle artifacts or black scythe artifacts, and then you can cash them in with Tuyen and Gwenin. And they, of course, take their own different types of currency. So then you can use that currency, whether it be any of these, exotic coinage, broken circle, black scythe, or order artifacts. And each of which is going to be more and more valuable. Same thing to go with Gwen. She's also the kind of like the secondary person or for this type of endgame mechanics. So you could look to see what she has available for purchase as well, using that same kind of currency. Aside from that, the other endgame mechanic we have is delirium. Delirium's pretty challenging. It's interesting, I should say. Not so much challenging, but the thing about delirium, if I can find one, there you go. This one has delirium right here. Delirium is interesting because you end up passing through a mirror, and immediately after you need to defeat as many enemies as possible and pass through more mirrors. And as you pass through more of these mirrors, you kind of allow yourself to get a higher chance of dropping what they call distilled essences. So if you don't kill enough enemies or touch enough more mirror fragments in time, then your timer goes out, and then you have to the end game mechanic is just over at that point. So what you would get from those are delirium, these little delirium pieces here, and it's called distilled greed, distilled guilt, distilled ire. These are things that are associated with the different things in your skill tree and your passive tree. So you can actually use them to instill amulets that you socket into your passive tree, and it will impact the passives around it. So really interesting. So again, if you're not sure what I'm talking about these jewels here can actually be instilled with different types of essences. So really interesting kind of mechanic there. Delirium is pretty fun. At first I didn't quite understand the mechanic, but now it's just simply defeat as many enemies as possible, move as quickly as possible. Once you obtain any of those items we talked about earlier, like I said, from the Breach, Delirium, Expedition, or Ritual, you're going to have enough fragments to form a key, and you would then input that key into the Realm Gate. This would then allow you to face off with the Pinnacle boss, which, of course, is going to grant you the best loot possible. Another thing I wanted to mention is you'll sometimes see what they call corruption nodes. So we'll look, there you go, there's one right there. The nodes in and of themselves are just, they just kind of look cooler, and they're usually surrounded by corruption, much like you would see whenever we saw the seed or the beast. Anyways, corruption isn't, like I said, necessarily an end game mode. It's more so a mechanic or modifier that negatively impacts you in some way. You'll usually see that maybe the enemies are +1 or +2 levels higher, and when you defeat enemies, there's a chance they drop this essence, and if there's enough of the red fragments close enough to each other, demons come out. So demons will then pop out, and you have different levels of demons. They're very fast, very powerful creatures that you have to work pretty hard to defeat. So there are some instances where you'll see the modifier ahead of time. So let's see, I think for example, this one right here says the area contains an additional essence. So not bad. And then I think there's another one here. Slaying enemies has a 30% increased chance to spawn Coalesce Corruption. Coalesce Corruption is, of course, those fragments I was talking about that when gathered closely together, they'll actually form demons. And you have to face off with demons. So in regards to the towers again, or the kind of the progression of what you want to do from the very beginning is you want to look for the hideouts. And I've already cleared most of the hideouts, so after you've kind of found a path, again, a path of least resistance where you don't have a lot of essence, and you find your hideout, then good for you. Now what you want to do is you want to start working your way to clear towers. And as you clear towers, they're going to increase your field of view as well. So if you clear this tower, for example, that's going to give us a nice chunk of this southeastern area or southwestern area here. And we'll continue looking at the map. As I said earlier, the major goal is to simply complete 10 maps of each tier, 1 through 15. So that's quite a few maps. Every 10 you complete, you're going to get a book of knowledge you can use to apply into the Atlas tree for more sustainability or just rarer drops or what have you. Ultimately though, after completing that, once you get to tier 15, you're going to see something really special. And that of course is going to be this right here, which is the Burning Monolith. The Burning Monolith is a unique area on the map because it is actually where the endgame boss resides. And in order to actually access the endgame boss, the first thing you need to do to start the quest is you need to clear the area around your Burning Monolith. And remember, everybody's map is going to be different. So yours could be here, for example. It could be in the far left. It could be further away even. Mine was actually very close and really visible. Even at my starting point, I could see that there was the Burning Monolith present. So what you want to do from here is you'll start a quest. You have to speak with Doriani, and it's called the Pinnacle of Flame. He tells you about this area after you clear it out, and it's no longer kind of enshrouded in fog. Then he says go visit it. Well, once you go and visit it, what you're going to see is that there's no way to enter. There's 3 slots for keys called crisis fragments. And what you need to do in order to actually access and open the door and face off with the boss is once you reach tier 15, there will be 3 different types of citadels. And in the map legend you can see in the bottom left hand corner, you have copper, iron, and stone citadels. The funny thing is they're not actually in that order. You're actually going to see iron, copper, or stone in any order, but just so that you know, the iron citadel is going to be associated with the Act 1 boss, the copper citadel will be associated with the Act 2 boss, and the stone citadel will be associated with the Act 3 boss. Those, once you have completed them, they're going to grant you a crisis fragment associated with each particular area. So if you defeat the Iron Citadel, Act 1, Count Geonor, you would get the crisis fragment associated with that. So that would be 1 of 3 keys needed to insert into the Burning Monolith once you arrive here. So you do need to defeat Act 1, 2, and 3 bosses at each of the associated citadels so you can obtain the crisis fragments. The crisis fragments then form the keys needed to enter the Burning Monolith and then face off with the endgame boss. So that would of course be the Arbiter. So essentially that is mapping in a nutshell. I know it seems like a little daunting at first, but essentially if you break it down in little pieces, it's not going to be nearly as difficult and you can have so much more fun. Know that you really shouldn't be using influences on towers or anything like that until you're pretty much at the tier 15 or higher for maximum juicage. That's going to allow you to pump up all of these areas that already have essences, and then they're going to be incredibly juicy. You're going to have so many different opportunities to increase your drop rates and the loot rarity. Whereas if you're doing it a little earlier, prematurely, and I'm using a precursor tablet that's only, kind of level 1, that's impacting 5 maps instead of 8 or 10, it's not really going to be ideal. Also, the precursor tablet in and of itself might have a mechanic that I really like. So say for example, if I really like Ritual or I really like Delirium, I'm going to want to use a Delirium tablet and apply it into this tower so that it impacts as many nodes as possible. So I would then go into my mapping, look at my precursor tablet, say, oh look, I have the Delirium precursor tablet, let me go ahead and apply it. 7 maps within this range are going to have these Delirium mirrors now. So now I have that end game mechanic. So what I suggest you do is clear out the maps and only the basic nodes that don't really have any influences on your way to your hideout, and then on your way to many towers. Clear the towers so you can get increased visibility, and that's going to allow you to really quickly complete the tier maps that you're trying to complete, whatever tier you happen to be on. So remember, it's 1 through 15. Once you get to 15, which is technically the highest, you can then access the citadels. Once the citadels are completed, you can then access the Burning Monolith, and then guess what? You've mastered PoE to endgame. So essentially that is the goal. The ultimate goal, how you beat it, so to speak, is you beat the Arbiter. This can of course be done again and again, but just so you know, you are going to want to kind of go about it in the order and be patient. Don't rush to do anything yet. Don't use a lot of precursor tablets on areas unless you just really want a certain type of mechanic at a lower difficulty or lower lower quality loot, lower rarity loot. But you do want to wait until ideally to start using precursor tablets until you're around tier 15 so that you can get the best loot possible. and all of these different waystones. So that would be the absolute best chance to optimize your chances of getting unique loot and just the best drops possible. This guy said earlier, you can of course influence your tablets. So say for example you have a tablet that you had here, you could stash it here, and then you could apply the different modifiers that we've talked about. The orb of transmutation, if it wasn't already magic. So this is already magic, so we'd have to then look for, you know, for example, a different item. So potentially the regal orb to make it a rare. Now it's yellow class or yellow tier. Now we can go ahead and have better modifiers, and then we could add more with the exalted orb, etc. So this is where the end game currency becomes really important and valuable, and you want to save it for these maps so you can get the best loot possible. And just another little tip, the tower density is excellent. So like for example, if you have towers like this that are really close to each other, and you have maps that are really juicy, like these have all kinds of influences on them, you're going to have a much better chance of optimizing your chances for the best loot possible if you influence these towers simultaneously, because of the density of the map nodes and the influences around here already. They already have a lot of built-in innate influences, so then I can add another. So say for example, this one has ritual and it looks like an expedition. If I wanted to add ritual on all the others, I certainly could. Now anything that already has the ritual influence on it would simply not be impacted by it. You can't double down on an influence on any given map, but it could impact any of the other nodes in this immediate area. So again, just another little tip, and I hope that that helped you guys. There's been a lot of, I'd say, guides out there, but nothing that it's been too friendly or user friendly for beginners or people that are new to the genre like myself. This is something that, a game that I truly love and enjoy. I just, out of the bat, I immediately got hooked on it, but there just wasn't any information out there that was usable for someone that was new to the genre or new to this series. So as a content creator, I was like, hey, might as well just make the guides that I would be looking for if I was newer to the game, newer to the genre, and I really wanted to enjoy it, but I was just overwhelmed because of the amount of content and the overlapping systems at play. So that's just something that I hope really helps you. I've kind of covered every single thing in regards to the map nodes, the different objectives, the end game mechanics, and of course the only thing that I haven't covered is the unique map, which is the unique map is actually, funny enough, the same for everybody. You just get unique rewards, but if the map that says unique map is actually the same for every single player. In regards to the wandering trader, you can see the traders sometimes depending on how far you progress, and please note that it is never ending. It is infinite. So as long as you continue to clear maps and nodes and activate towers, you're going to see more and more map. The reliquary vault is going to be a place where you can access a key. So obviously you need to go and access this area first, and then you can obviously clear it out as well. But as I said, in regards to the map, it's ever expanding. It will never stop expanding. So it is infinite. And as you continue to clear maps and all that and activate towers, you're going to get more sections of it cleared off. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. If you have any more questions, just let me know in the comments what you specifically want me to cover. Obviously, I do have build guides for newer players that last all the way to end game. So if you want anything like that, I can certainly do build guides. Those are some of my favorite things to do. But if not, we can go into other mechanics of PoE2 that we might need as more, beginners and people that are new to this particular game. So in series, it's wonderful, and I honestly encourage you to try if you haven't already. But if you feel like you're overwhelmed, just let me know what it is you're having trouble with, and I'll be able to cover. I've put over 100 hours in it in the last few days, and again, this is my job, so I want to make it easier for you guys. I want to make it enjoyable for you guys, and I want you to really enjoy this experience as much as possible, because it's a fantastic game, and trust me, I'm going to be here for it. So hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for being the best part of my channel, and until next time, it's the Inhuman one signing out.